with John. So, folks, John DiNardo, let me tell you a little bit about him. Following his service as a U.S. Marine aircraft electronics technician, he earned the bachelor's degree in science education from Keene University, specializing in physics and biology. So, I mean, we're not talking about just some fly-by-night here. He's well educated. He received state certification to teach all of the sciences in high schools of New Jersey. His early career involved teaching 12th grade high school physics, 6 classes daily he did. He's got a hell of a bio here, folks. He worked with a ton of companies, including AT&T and Bell Laboratories and all these different companies. He has done extensive research in the field of Planet X. He is, out of the Planet X people who I've had on, there's a few of them that I think are really good, and he's right there with that top bunch. And so let's bring on John DiNardo. And folks, we'll take your calls later in the show if you've got a question or a comment.
Hello.
Good evening, John. This is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Fine. Hi, Michael. I'm glad to be with you and your audience.
Whoa, it's great to have you back, my friend. I was just telling everybody a little bit about you and telling them that you're amongst my top researchers when it comes to this topic. So I appreciate it.
Well, that's an honor. Thanks so much, Michael.
Absolutely. So, John, where would you like to start tonight?
There's the latest news we have is from the Atacama Large Meter Submillimeter Array Telescope in Chile. It's the largest telescope on planet Earth. It's a radio telescope capable of detecting not only visible light, but, as you know, light is just one particular frequency spectrum, portion of the frequency band of all electromagnetic energy. Radio waves are also the same identical type of electromagnetic energy as light. And gamma rays are also the same type of electromagnetic energy. The only difference is that they all vibrate or oscillate at different frequencies. That is the different number of cycles per second. So because this telescope is a radio telescope, it's able to detect not only visible light, but sub-visible light, such as infrared, which is what Planet X emits right now. And this is why it's so key. Not only is it capable of sighting distant objects, but it's also able to see non-light emitting objects. Well, the Atacama Large Meter Submillimeter Array, extending more than 3 miles high into the sky in Chile, has just reported that they have detected what is very possibly Planet X. And the diabolical ruling elite are quite upset. They don't know what to do. They've always known that somebody was going to blow the lid off of their secret. They're, in fact, the diabolical ruling elite. There have been reports from credible, reputable newspapers, such as the London Daily Mail, that the elite are going underground. And these reports have been coming out throughout this year of 2015. So we know things are happening. They're getting ready for a war. A war is always cooked up whenever there is something catastrophic about to happen, such as a planned financial collapse.
John, I'm going to leave you you just keep going ahead with this. I got to leave the mic for a few minutes. I kind of got a flood in the other room I need to take care of.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, please, I hope everything works out well for you.
I'll be right back. All right.
All right.
But go right ahead.
Okay, so we see the signs all around us that something drastic is about to happen, and we should not be worried if we have trust in God. We should now prepare calmly, and because I expect, and many observers who have been studying the situation of not only Planet X, but the world affairs and the cataclysms of the precipices that we appear to be at right now in terms of world politics, the world economy, world war, social upheaval, etc. So we should be preparing for dislocations in our civilizations, such as loss of electrical power. That possible loss of electrical power over major regions of the earth has been discussed and has been of great concern to many people. Ted Koppel, the famous news reporter. Of course, news reporters who are currently in the news cannot be relied upon because their speeches and thoughts are controlled. However, people like Ted Koppel, who have long since retired, they can speak out. And Ted Koppel has written a book warning that we can expect widespread and long protracted power outages. So we should get prepared for that now. Planet X has been sighted. I'm quite sure. I intend to try to go through, in the limited time we have, the vast array of evidence that we have, showing that indeed this huge brown dwarf star has been detected, not only now but in the past, and is naturally, understandably being pulled in by our sun's great gravitational force field. Our sun is like a celestial fisherman. Our sun's mass is incredibly great. Our sun's mass is equivalent to nearly 1/3 of a million Earth masses. And as we know, according to our own experience every day with gravity, and according to Sir Isaac Newton's universal law of gravitation, the greater the mass of a body, the greater its gravitational pull. So this is why Planet X is coming in. It's not an accident. It doesn't happen to be accidentally coming in. It is a brown dwarf star, of which many are out there in deep space. And this particular brown dwarf star has gotten close enough to our solar system that it has impinged on Earth's, on our solar system's distant outlying borders of our solar system's gravitational force field. And as you know, when an object gets within a force field, whether it be a gravitational force field or a magnetic force field, that object is going to be pulled in and it will be accelerated, which is happening now. So this has been expected. I have studied this subject, and many others have studied this subject of Planet X for 15 years or more. I would say the first time I heard about it was in 2002, and I had a spiritual awakening. You know, it was an intuition spiritually, I believe from God, that this is true. This Planet X, even though I knew nothing about it, entering a large body, entering our solar system, which would cause gravitational molestations of Earth at distances of several million miles away as it passes by. I had realized intuitively that this was true, and without having studied it. But then the more I studied it, the more I realized from a scientific and logical basis of study, it is indeed true. And the more you study it, the more you realize, the more sounder your belief becomes. There are so many fields of evidence that show us, all pointing, converging, agreeing, overlapping, intersecting one another, indicating that this brown dwarf star is indeed coming into our solar system. There is the field of the Bible, not only the Holy Bible, but other religious texts have prophesied a large object, a great devastation coming into our solar system, wreaking havoc upon planet Earth. That's the religious aspect of the evidence. There's also the scientific aspect of it. Scientifically, this object, I can take you back to the prime evidence supporting this, the belief that this object is indeed exists and it's indeed being pulled in by our sun, and that is the launching by our U.S. government in conjunction with the government of the Netherlands and Great Britain in 1983, nearly a third of a century ago, where they were launching this infrared astronomical satellite. And I have the New York Times landmark report on the launching of that satellite. At that time, they were not muzzled. The astronomers and astrophysicists of that day were actually proud to declare to the world that they were launching this infrared, because infrared, this telescope was designed to detect infrared light, not visible light. And they were proud to herald the launching of it in the New York Times article. I have it right in front of me. And it's a very long article, but it's extremely informative. What they're saying in the article is that then in January 30th, 1983 to be exact, the infrared astronomical satellite was being launched, quote, to detect the long-sought planet X.
I'm
so they
back.
Actually were free to use the term Planet X. Welcome back, Michael.
I have one of those refrigerators that apparently is smart, I guess, and, well, it has a water compartment where it'll give you water. Well, it was giving water all right. I thought I heard something, and I wasn't sure. I'm glad I caught it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Glad it worked out okay for you.
So we're good, because if I didn't catch it in time, it would have been coming downhill to the studio shortly.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I heard so. It's all good now. I did
Great.
a super speedy cleanup, and here we are. So continue.
Okay. Well, anyway, so in this New York Times, you know what I'm going to do for credibility? I'm going to read some clips from it, but I don't want to take too much time because I know there's so many avenues or channels of fields of information that we can talk about that all converge to indicate that this brown dwarf star is indeed entering our solar system. So I'll just touch on this.
Okay.
This is Sunday, January 30th, 1983. I have the actual photocopy of the article, which I posted on the internet. It's widely available, so that people cannot, skeptics cannot say, well, that's just you made up the text of it, but where's the actual article? I have it photocopied with a photograph in the article of U.S. and Dutch technicians preparing the infrared astronomical satellite before its launch in January of 1983. United Press International from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'll just read a bit. The title is January 30th, 1983, Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford of the New York Times. Quote, something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. So what they're saying is that there's a gravitational pull on the outer gas giants, Uranus and Neptune, and they knew, astronomers know, that only a large body could cause the irregularities or perturbations or pluckings out of their orbital paths of these large outer planets, Uranus and Neptune. Mm-hmm. So they knew there must be a body out there. They couldn't see it, but incidentally, a year before that, back in the a couple of years before 1983. In the 1970s, I also have a New York Times article that shows that they also went out to look for it. This was their first venture, the U.S. government's first venture into space to try to detect this object. They've been very concerned about it for decades and very quiet about it, secretive.
And I'll point out as well, seeing someone brought it up in the chat, that yes, back in 1983, I was in my science class at John Marshall High School. Mr. Freeman was my teacher, so if anyone wants to go look it up or something. But we got magazines, little thin paperback type magazines that would come in every week, and he would hand them out to us, and we were to pick an article, something in there, and do an essay on it. I happened to that week see the Planet X stuff, and it talked about how a satellite, a Russian satellite, had gone off course and actually got a glimpse of this thing, that it was partially in our solar system, and that's what I read. And they talked about how it can have life on it and this and that, and it was like it was really big, but it was Earth-like. And I mean, I remember reading about this thing, and they called it Planet X, and then I didn't hear no more about it. And that's what it said in that magazine. It talked about it being, like this satellite went out of orbit and accidentally caught it.
And that was in 1983, that report.
Yes.
Right,
mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. That's about 1983, right after the New York Times article. That's when the NSA, the diabolical ruling elites, organ of deceit and control, called the National Security Agency, the spy agency, controls all the other agencies of the government, and they muzzled NASA. They muzzled the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and told them not to talk about it anymore. This was soon after this article was published that I'm reporting on now from the New York Times, and that's why you heard very little about it, although a few major publications, news publications, did put out reports which I have collected. I didn't collect them all because there were several others, but I did get one that was sort of sneaked by the censors in 1984, and that was from the third largest news magazine in the United States, U.S. News and World Report, where they stated, they restated the discovery of Planet X in this 1984 U.S. News and World Report article that I have. So there have been reports, and we could see, our common sense tells us that when a subject is stifled by the diabolical ruling elite, then we know that there's something happening, something serious behind that suppressed story. We know there's more to it. There's something there that they don't want us do not want the public to know about. And of course, it's logical, because the diabolical ruling elite, their main interest is not only wealth and power. It's also power goes along with controlling the people, controlling their thoughts, manipulating their thoughts so that they can continue to perpetrate their evil unimpeded, unopposed. And that requires lies upon lies. And one form of a lie is the omission of truth. You just omit the truth, vital truth.
Yeah.
So this is more evidence to show us that they've covered up the truth, and therefore there's a very serious subject that is being covered up. When you realize their motive behind the cover-up, it becomes obvious. When this object comes in, they all know this because they have the greatest scientists that money can buy in the U.S. government. And they know that when this object comes in, their studies show that it will not hit the Earth. It will pass by Earth, maybe as close as several million miles away. Why? Because it's on its way to its gravitational rendezvous with our sun. It will not strike the sun. It has come in, incidentally, this brown dwarf star has come in at regular intervals throughout the past. And incidentally, that brings us to another field of evidence proving that this planet X exists, and that is the periodicity, the regularity of the intrusion of this object into our solar system every 36.5 centuries, almost like clockwork, chronological clockwork, every 36.5 centuries. And we can talk about the geological evidence showing that the great catastrophes were inflicted upon the entire planet Earth every 36.5 centuries. But getting back to now we're jumping back to the field of scientific astronomical evidence that this object, this brown dwarf star, exists and is indeed being pulled in to pass by Earth and cause great gravitational molestation of Earth's surfaces as it passes by Earth several million miles away on its gravitational rendezvous with our sun. And that is, I'm still working on this 1983 New York Times landmark report titled Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X, which talks about the launching of the infrared astronomical satellite, which was specifically commissioned to do just that, to find this object. And reverting back to an earlier history before 1983, I'm looking at another New York Times article, which I also photocopied from my archives in my county library. And this is New York Times, Saturday, June 19th, 1982, over a year before the 1983 New York Times article. And I'm just going to read a little bit of that. Title, Spacecraft May Detect Mystery Body in Space. From Sunnyvale, California, June 18th, United Press International. Quote, a pair of American spacecraft may help scientists detect what could be a 10th planet or a giant object billions of miles away, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration said Thursday. You see, NASA was free to speak about it way back in 1982. Continuing, scientists at the Space Agency's Ames Research Center said the two spacecraft, Pioneers 10 and 11, which are already farther into space than any other man-made objects, might add to knowledge of a mysterious object believed to be beyond the solar system's outermost known planets. The Space Agency said that persistent irregularities in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune suggest some kind of mystery object is really there, with its distance depending on what it is. Okay, so that's enough of that article because of the limited time that we have. But you see, they sent up the Pioneer space probe, and what they were doing with, according to this article here, I'll give you a further insight, is the space probe, Pioneer 10, was sent up in the calculated to go into the deep regions of our solar system, as far out as you can imagine, and never return on an endless journey. This Pioneer 10 was sent on a trajectory that would pass very close to where the scientists and astronomers have calculated this mysterious pulling object was located. And their rationale was quite understandable, logical, and that is, if this space probe, Pioneer 10, got close enough to this huge gravitationally pulling object, well then this object would pull the Pioneer space probe slightly off of its trajectory, and that would constitute evidence that indeed this object, this gravitational body, was out there. And that's what happened. Now, I'm telling you that's what happened, even though they did not report it. To my knowledge, they did not admit the results of the Pioneer 10 space probe mission. They, of course, they're not going to tell you, well, yeah, we were looking for... Well, they told you this was wonderful. This is wonderful that at that time, the NSA had not been crafty enough to muzzle the NASA. And so NASA was telling us, yeah, we're looking for Planet X. That's what the purpose of this Pioneer 10 space probe is. But to my knowledge, later on, it took a long time for that space probe to get out there, because it's traveling in the solar system, very deep into the solar system.
And John, it's a little early, but we're going to take a call. We've got a call that came in. Unknown number. What's your first name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going, Mike? How you been? Hey, John, my name's Jake, and I just wanted to interject a few things while you're telling the story about Planet X. The brown dwarf star is named Nemesis, okay?
Yes.
It's not Planet X. Planet X is the planet that is coming through with it.
There are many names for it. To my knowledge, Nemesis is just another name for Planet X.
No,
etc.
Nibiru and Planet X are two different things than Nemesis, which is the brown dwarf star. It's a mini solar system that's coming through our solar system. Now, Planet X / Nibiru is the planet that comes within our orbit, close enough to us to cause all these disturbances you're talking about. They're two different distinct things. One is a planet, one is a star, a brown dwarf star. Okay, you gotta do the research, brother.
All right. Well, thank you for the call, John. What say you?
Well, I disagree with Jake on that point. From what my studies show that indicate that Nemesis, Nibiru, Planet X, they're all one and the same. It's a brown dwarf star. But anyway, we agree. Jake and I agree pretty much on the most essential point, and that is there's a large body, a huge body that's being pulled in by our sun, and that's really what matters. You know, when the great Earth catastrophes occur, when Earth, as this object passes, it makes its closest passage by planet Earth, several million miles away, and its gravitational pull begins to massage Earth's crust and Earth's underlying viscous mantle, and land masses begin to sink and become seabeds, and seabeds rise, are pulled up and become land masses, new land masses. It really won't matter to anybody whether it's a brown dwarf star or whether it's another object that's accompanying it. People won't care. So the main issue is, yes, we have a brown dwarf, we have a massive object, and again, this is a brown dwarf star. According to, let me try to clarify that point that Jake was making. According to the knowledge that I have from, go ahead.
I just want to ask really quick, that's something that's always puzzled me. If it is a brown dwarf star, how come they call it Planet X? It was called a planet. It's been called different names. It was because it was so far out and distant. Let's go back to the 1970s when there were indications that it existed due to the perturbations in our outer planets. That's the first sign that we've ever had, and those indications are it's hard to imagine that those indications of perturbations or pluckings in the paths of the outer planets, Uranus and Neptune, were noticed by astronomers as long ago as the early 1800s, nearly 2 centuries ago. So at that time, they didn't know what it was. I mean, they figured there's a large body out there. They called it a planet because that's what they knew in those times. In those days, I mean, it was so nebulous and so far out, all they could see was the gravitational footprint of this object. So they called it a planet, but it's a misnomer to some extent. But it's really not a misnomer. Because if you look at Jupiter is a gas giant. If Jupiter were just a little bit larger, Jupiter would be a brown dwarf star. Okay, so brown dwarf stars can be called planets. Jupiter is almost on the brink of becoming a brown dwarf star, according to its size. It has all the characteristics of a dwarf star, but it's called a planet, isn't it? I mean, we've always called Jupiter a planet. Well, that's true. Now, speaking of Jupiter, do you think that in the future it could still ignite into a brown dwarf? Maybe that's the sitting, nemesis, if you will.
Probably not, because, well, first of all, it's hard for Jupiter to gain enough mass. In order to ignite a body, a dwarf star, a smoldering brown dwarf star, has to pick up enough objects and suck them into its center gravitationally and build up its mass enough so that the pressure caused by all this mass converging and aggregating upon itself will cause such intense pressure that nuclear fusion will occur, and that's what the energy from the nuclear fusion is what creates the light and the ignition, just as our sun does. Our sun is a star. It's an adult star, and it's the same as Jupiter, actually. The only difference is our sun has much more mass, many more bodies have aggregated and clumped together to form our sun, and that's why our sun is igniting, because it's much larger than Jupiter, and Jupiter is smoldering. It's actually creating some nuclear fusion, but it's not enough to create visible light. So that's what the whole bottom line is. The greater the mass, the more it ignites with visible light. So I don't think Jupiter's ever going to get that large unless it's something large, another large body really collides with Jupiter, and now it becomes a much greater body. Let's hope that doesn't happen, because Jupiter's mass is critical to shepherding the planets in our solar system, including Earth. And if Jupiter were not as large as it is, and on the same orbital path that it is, it would not keep Earth in its necessary quasi-circular orbit around our sun. And we would be in serious trouble. In fact, there's been speculation that a rogue planet, such as Planet X, could disturb Earth's orbital path and make it less circular and more eccentric, more elliptical. And if that happens, we're all dead.
And it could do this without hitting the Earth.
Without hitting, exactly. In fact, I have videotaped, fortunately, it's videotaped a Weather Channel, a great Weather Channel documentary from the Weather Channel series titled Forecasting the End. And one of the episodes in that I have videotaped, I have it on DVD, and I put it up on my Vimeo channel. And it's titled Rogue Planets. And what they're showing you with wonderful graphics and scientists explaining the phenomena, that Jupiter, and I don't believe it's an accident. I know that God has created all this association of planets and the relationship of planets perfectly, so that Earth would revolve around the sun with rather circular motion and give us livable conditions. So I know that this is by God, but what they're telling us is that Jupiter shepherds the orbital path of the planets because of its great gravitational pull. It's at just the right distance, and it has just the right mass to create just the right amount of gravitational pull on Earth. Now, they say if a rogue planet comes in, a very large one, and I think they're alluding to Planet X. In fact, what I pointed out something, it's a subtle portion of this broadcast on Forecasting the End, Rogue Planets, where they have astronomers showing what they have detected to be a brown dwarf star. And they're saying this is the rogue planet that we've detected, and they're alluding to Planet X, I believe. You can see it in the Vimeo report that I have posted on my Vimeo channel. So they're saying if a rogue planet comes in, we're in trouble, folks, because it's going to pull Earth's orbital path from a circular shape to an eccentric elliptical shape, which means that Earth, during one portion of the year, Earth will come too close to the sun, so close that Earth will become extremely hot. Life will begin to die out. And then during the other seasons, as Earth makes its eccentric revolution around the sun, and pulls away from the sun too far away, then Earth will abruptly become so cold that life is threatened and much of life will die. So it would be an annual cycle of cold and hot extremes, so extreme that life will die off rather quickly.
Well, it would probably tear the atmosphere apart, I'm guessing. And wouldn't this happen wouldn't we be in trouble if any of the planets were knocked out of their orbit? Because aren't they all kind of depending on one another?
Yes, that's true. That's very true. For example, there's scientists have studied, the great Immanuel Velikovsky studied this, and he talked about Venus being a rather new planet coming into our solar system around 4,000 years ago. And that was just about the time of Planet X's entry. Our evidence shows us that Planet X entered around 36 and a half centuries ago, pretty close to 4,000 years ago. And at that time, this object, Planet X, is like a shotgun with pellets being outlying celestial bodies that it has captured while coming in from deep space, and it carries them in like a gang, like a bee swarm. I liken it to a bee swarm surrounding a beehive, Planet X being a beehive. And turned out that, according to Dr. Immanuel Velikovsky, that Venus was one of the large comets that was one of the gravitationally captured bees of this Planet X around 4,000 years ago. And Venus came in and was captured by the sun and then became a new member of our solar system. Now, before that happened, there was a different orbital relationship between the planets to Earth. And before that happened, before that great celestial occurrence 4,000 years ago, Mars used to make its orbital passages very close to Earth, so close that it would cause upheavals on Earth. And it was around, trying to think now. No, I guess there was some other cometary intrusions that came later than 4,000 years ago, but they're also related to Venus because Venus changed its path. It took several hundred years to make its orbital adjustment into its path.
Something kicked Mars' butt too.
I'm sorry, what?
I say something kicked Mars' butt too.
Yeah, right. So that was speculated by Dr. Velikovsky to be Venus itself, which came by Mars, and its gravitational pull actually sucked the moisture, the water from Mars's atmosphere and its surface. We all know that there are what looks like riverbeds on Mars. I haven't studied the subject real deeply, so I'm not a great expert on that, but passingly, it's true that the scientific evidence shows that Mars had its atmosphere pulled off, atmospheric water pulled off, and go back to the time of the Great Flood, which was, again, I'll talk about this later, but that was 2 Planet X orbits ago. That would be 2 times 36 and a half centuries ago. Each Planet X incursion with its gang of cometary bees surrounding it, occurring every 36 and a half centuries, because that's how comets operate. This object is like a brown dwarf star planet operating on a cometary orbit. So it's got characteristics of not only a dwarf star, but also a planet, and also motions quite like a comet.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, going back to 2 Planet X orbits ago, that's 2 times 36 and a half centuries ago, which would take you back to around 5,300 BC, 5,300 BC. The geologists Pittman and Ryan, I believe it's Pitmann and Ryan, Ryan, they have made a great discovery in recent years, and that is that they believe the great flood of Noah's Day occurred around 5300 BC. That's 2 Planet X orbits ago. They don't know anything about Planet X, which makes it even more credible, because when somebody doesn't know anything about Planet X, then you cannot accuse them. They cannot be accused by skeptics of being biased toward the Planet X theory.